I think it's something that Zach and I are very familiar with through our work in communication, and in fact, I think it's the subtitle of Zach's book, The Importance of Narrative. That you have to tell a story. It's not enough to just have the facts on your side if you believe you have the facts on your side. And of course, there are people who would legitimately dispute whether any of us does. But when we're having this difficulty of connecting with each other, very often it's because I think we're giving out all these bullet points. And if you only understood, you would see that I'm right. Really, your whole problem is you don't yet understand that I'm right. And strangely enough, that doesn't go over well. And Zach mentioned relationships earlier, and I'd invite anybody to try that if you have a significant other. Just try to see how well that works. And it's the same as Zach has suggested, it's the same in politics. It's a bunch of relationships, right? So, whether it's the Democratic Party or anybody else, I wonder if maybe Zach would like to say a little bit about how narrative makes that difference.
Well, we learn through story. We learn through emotion. I can tell you the date, the hour, and actually the minute that my son was born. And even though I was a history major, I couldn't really name you the years of a lot of the wars because they just don't resonate with me the same way. We've become a world that for some reason has a difficult time communicating through emotion, or I should say on the progressive side of the parties and the Democratic Party. We could just do a better job telling the story. I mean, a lot of the things on the Obama administration, they did a lot of things right, but a lot of things that I would argue that they could have done better was actually telling that story about, on the emotional side, about the things that they were actually doing. He's a very consequential president. I mean, he actually did, without having anybody in Congress support him functionally after the first 2 years, he got a lot done. I mean, on consumer protections, on healthcare, and a lot of other things. And the reason I think we were so good on the campaign was because we told a very compelling story in 2008. And all of us actually have spent a significant amount of time with him. And one of the things that I think is important, the important difference between him and then how he governed in the White House, and I'd love to hear Adrienne's opinion on this, he always would come back to, is that the right thing to do? When we were traveling around Pennsylvania, and politics are done different in some of these states, right? I mean, there's a lot of payoffs. I mean, so you think that democracy is clean. It's not as clean as you would think. In a lot of these states, there's pay to play and certain things. By the way, you can write me a check later. But it's not as clean in some of these states. And he would just say, we don't do that. We don't play by those rules, even though the Democratic Party had actually played by those rules in a lot of these industrial states for quite some time. That, I think, played through in how they governed. I don't think you see that playing through in the current administration in the exact same way. I don't think they had a set of understanding of basic rules and respect for institution. That even just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And even though I think a lot of what's going on is theoretically constitutional, I think that what's drawing people back from it is this sense of it just doesn't feel right, though, from an institutional standpoint, from a history standpoint, from the way that the United States of America isn't like that, right? We still are this story. We're a story, we're a belief, and it's an evolving story and belief, and we should be that shiny beacon on the hill. And I think that that's what Obama did. I think he stopped telling that story, which I think was unfortunate. Yeah. But I mean, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, President Obama was such a good storyteller and was so attached to stories. There's sort of two comments I want to make. I mean, first, I'm sure folks in this audience have read, and the president used to take home 10 letters every night. We called them the 10 lads, 10 letters a day. And they'd be these extraordinary stories. I mean, he would get millions of emails and letters every day, and the folks in the correspondence office had the unenviable task of going through them and selecting 10 for the president to take home every night. And then those of us on the policy side sort of had the unenviable task of, people would have these horrible stories about, things that had happened to them in their lives, but these great stories about how they had persevered through it. And, often the president would read these letters, and then you'd walk into work the next day, and on your desk would be, the letter, and he would have written some message on it, like, what are we doing about this? Like, why is this happening? Wasn't this supposed to fix this issue, right? And you're like, oh, now I got to figure out how to explain this, right? It's like, but he was very into the stories and doing the right thing. And I think Zach's absolutely right. It didn't always sort of come across, especially as it got later in the presidency, just how much he really cared about doing the right thing. And there were any number of meetings that I'd be in where, he really wanted to know, and I think it trickled down throughout the staff, right? He wanted every point of view on an issue. And he wanted to understand the politics of it, but it never drove a decision. It's always what was the right answer, and then if the right answer is going to be bad for us politically, like how do we manage that? It was never a decision made about politics. And I feel very good about like being able to say that with a straight face and being very committed to that answer.
I told the president when he first got elected that I hoped that he would have fireside chats with the American people. First we knew we were going to do health care, on what was broken, and it suggested that you don't have to have the answer. You don't have to tell how we're going to fix it. But this is a very complicated issue. Also, we're in this fiscal crisis. Nobody understands it. He had the power of the podium, and he had the knowledge and the skills to be a great orator and to really sit down. And I think that if he'd started his presidency that way, telling the American people, I'm in this new job, and here's what's going on with American healthcare and why it's broken. We ended up introducing bills, and probably the largest crowd that's ever been in this building was the town hall meeting I had on Obamacare. And it was near riot. And the chief of police
I was
over.
here.
Chief of police came over. I was having dinner across the street and came over and said, we either have to move it or shut it down. And I said, well, do we have to shut it down? He said, well, I have a plainclothes officer in there next to you, but it's really it's problematic. And what I learned from those town halls is that the problem is nobody understood healthcare in America. They only understood their own issue. And they thought that if they had Medicare, that this was going to dramatically change Medicare. As one person who was back there campaigning against it said to me in the hallway when I went out for a vote, he saw my pin and he said, Congressman, you got to kill the bill. I said, well, why do you want the bill killed? And he says, we don't want government getting involved in our Medicare. And I said, are you worried? He says, no, I'm retired. And I said, what was he said, I had a career in the military. I said, so you're on a military pension that's a government pension, and you've got TRICARE and TRICARE for life, and which is essentially Medicare. And he had no knowledge. And what I found in these town hall meetings, that people just really didn't know about what was broken in the healthcare system, other than perhaps their premiums were too high. But the idea there was that the insurance companies owned the system. They would only insure you if you were almost assured that you wouldn't get sick. And then if you got sick, you were a pre-existing condition, and they were going to sell you a policy that would cover that condition. And so we had all these people that were but didn't have enough money to buy that extra expensive insurance policy. What we did is we created a national standard. The states license insurance companies, so we just created a national standard saying every insurance policy in the United States has to be a basic policy. So you're all going to compete on the same grounds. And every policy is going to have, as we said, added this health care and why? Mental health and alcohol. But the problem is, I don't think we've even ever explained how we fixed it. And remember, everybody was so much against Obamacare. Now they're going to start to take it away. And we're beginning to understand, that is going to change the policy that I, for the first time, have. So I think that this is part of this dialogue.
I think we can all agree there's a way to go.
You can find that commonality to actually address some of these real problems, because as Sam knows, man, for the largeness of our problems, we sure get caught up in the smallness of politics, and I do not know why. Because I think that we can all agree with the income inequality and a number of other things in our communities right here in the Central Coast. There are big problems we have to address, but we just need to give them the space to do it.